¿Ah?
Es que yo tengo un video.
¿Esto?
No puedo, no está bajando.
¿Este?
Ahora mucho, mucho.
Lo último está.
¿Quieres el sonido? Sí, yo lo pago. ¿Listo?
Vale.
Ya, estamos. Sí.
Thank you all for coming. My name is Gladys Mello. I'm part of the Movement for Peace in Colombia, a small organization working for, give it a push to the Colombian peace process, and with no party involved. We are more Colombian and Colombian Americans trying to have a better post-conflict for our country. I'm Colombian and American. And we have a privilege to have more, they don't want to have a panel, they want to have more kind of round table, and at the same time we want to have more interactive conversation with all of you. That you come and interested, and we want to know, what are you thinking about the Colombian peace process? And we're privileged to have these three people. We have Sebastian, who is, he comes from the academic background. He's now doing his PhD at Princeton in anthropology. He has a previous work related to migrant issues, concerns, and inequality. Then for him to find his research work in Colombia with the Madres de Soacha, which is like a neighborhood, at-risk neighborhood. He's gonna explain his case, his exchange with these women, these brave women. We have Melissa, who is Director of Communications of Human Pictures. She is also in the board of Witness for Peace. I recommend their work. It's very interesting work. She has work in Colombia, she has work in Costa Rica. She has also, and her team work on issues of gender minorities, sexual minorities, and we have Cassandra, who is the Associate Director of Advocacy at Madrid, a very interesting organization focusing their work only with women. They have a very interesting work in Colombia, peace building through art. Then I let them to have their conversation.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to start. As was mentioned already, my name is Sebastian Ramirez. And I'm just going to show a very short teaser, and then I'm going to explain what's going on.
Ser madre es todo. Madre lo encierra todo. La tierra lo encierra todo porque ella da de comer, da calor, da pasto, de todo. Nosotras las madres como madres también que somos, damos mucho a nuestros hijos, el amor, el cariño, la comprensión, es el ser de lo más profundo de nuestro ser, de nuestras vidas, de nuestras entrañas, que es la vida, la sangre, el ser, la carne, todo.
Okay. So. So what you just saw is the beginning of a project that started a year and a half ago with this group of women called Las Madres de Soacha, the Mothers of Soacha. Soacha is a city just south of Bogota, the capital of Colombia. These mothers gained notoriety because their children disappeared one day. And they went to the authorities, and after much investigation, it was discovered that their children had been kidnapped by the army, by soldiers in the army, sent to rural areas in Colombia, dressed up in the uniforms of guerrilla fighters, and executed, and then buried in mass graves. And this was done so that the army could claim that it was being very effective in its war against the guerrillas. So the reason why this became possible were several. One was American involvement in the war in Colombia. There was a lot of money being pumped into the country through Colombia as part of the war on drugs. And there was an expectation of some sort of accounting of what was being done with the money, of the effectiveness of the Colombian engagement with the guerrillas. There was also part of Álvaro Uribe's, the previous president's, politics of war. He decided that the best way to incentivize soldiers' actions in the battlefield was to pay them for every death of a guerrilla fighter. So we ended up with this. We ended up with civilians being kidnapped and killed and presented as fighters. This was the original group in Soacha were 20 women. It has now the tally is up to 3,000 people were killed in this way. It's huge. So this was part of. So this project that we're working on is part of a way of accounting, providing a different kind of accounting for these deaths as a way for the mothers to reclaim a voice in this debate. And it's, so here are some of the photographs that the focus is mostly on portraiture. So they were buried in Soacha. We did interviews with them, and so that the artist, Carlos Saavedra, who's from Cartagena, is very interested in working with the themes of earth and motherhood and death and rebirth and the connection between them. I lost my thread. Oh, so the reason why I think it was important for them to have this opportunity to speak about their laws is because in the ways in which the war is reckoned with in Colombia is strange. Like with any war, nobody's really sure what's going on. Who's a victim and who's a victimizer is always kind of muddled. But in Colombia in particular, this is true because the people that are trying to ascertain the truth are often the targets of the war. So you have human rights activists, you have journalists, you have NGO workers, and they're constantly being threatened and targeted by the army, by the paramilitaries, by the guerrillas. So trying to get a sense of what is happening is very difficult, especially when you have this game of mirrors in which the guerrillas are being, or civilians are being dressed as guerrilla fighters, The army is collaborating with the paramilitaries in order to kill civilians. When the president of the country does not defend the armed forces, when this scandal came to light, his official retort was an ironic one. He said, well, those kids were certainly not just growing coffee out there. They must have been doing something. So there's this game of not knowing, and this is what produces a sense of uncertainty in the war in Colombia. And it's come to a place where it's very hard. Colombians often, when you talk to these mothers, some of them will tell you that they stay up at night thinking, well, what happened to him? Was he bound? Was he gagged? Was he aware of what was going on at the time? Was he tortured right before they killed him? There's only one thing that we know, and this is something that they've all said, these are like verbatim words with them. There's only one thing we know for sure, and that's that they're dead. So what does that mean for us? We're trying to make sense of this war, if the only thing that we know is that people are dead. Well, we have projects like these, though, that take that uncertainty and make something different with it. Art lets you do that. Art lets you imagine a world otherwise. And whereas we're not, renouncing the idea of truth, there should be justice, there's also space for other kinds of voices and other kinds of reckonings of the war that may be more intimate, that may be more personal, that might let us have different conversations. So that's my.
So thank you very much for coming here to listen to this talk. I think it's really important. And as was already mentioned, I am part of the National Board of Directors for Witness for Peace. Formerly, I worked in Colombia on the international team. And Witness for Peace is a national grassroots organization working for peace, justice, and sustainable economies in the Americas. And we do that by working to change U.S. foreign and economic policies and practices of U.S. multinational corporations that generate oppression and poverty in the Americas. We work with communities who are resisting these policies and practices nonviolently, who work in solidarity with their efforts. We organize delegations of U.S. citizens to go and see firsthand communities that have been most adversely impacted by these conditions. And we bring community leaders from the countries that we work in. We're in Mexico, Nicaragua. Our Nicaragua team also works in Honduras. We're in Cuba and Colombia. And we bring human rights leaders from those countries to the U.S. for 3-week speaking tours to meet with human rights groups, activist groups, universities, church groups, community groups, a variety of different groups who want to hear the messages that are not coming out in the mainstream media, and offering a different narrative to what's really going on the ground, and how our military aid and free trade agreements and different policies like that are really impacting people's lives. And in the US, when delegates return from a delegation, they're plugged into a network of over 20,000 members that we have in the US who are organizing through grassroots mobilizations to change the policies and practices of the multinational corporations and the US government. I'm going to talk today about a community that we started accompanying in its inception of the construction of a humanitarian zone. It's called Puente Nayero, and it's a community that's on the Pacific coast of Colombia. It's right by one of the largest port cities in the country, in Buenaventura. A lot of people don't realize that Colombia has the second largest Afro Black population after Brazil. And the Pacific coast, the majority of the population is Afro-Colombian. This particular community was being threatened by paramilitary groups, and paramilitary groups in Colombia have historically worked as kind of the black shadow groups of the military, of elite people in government and corporations, using violence to uphold these elite interests. And oftentimes communities, Afro communities, indigenous communities, small-scale farming communities have been the communities most impacted by the conflict, sitting on large resources of gold mines and coal mines and lots of different minerals, extremely fertile land, and so the war in Colombia is really a land war, and who controls those resources wields the power. So 13 months ago, the first humanitarian zone was established in an urban context. 13 years ago, humanitarian zones had been established in the countryside. A humanitarian zone is a political strategy to protect communities at risk of human rights violations. And so, at its inception, Witness for Peace started to accompany Puente Nayero. I'm going to show a video. I think the community is the best voice position to tell you more about what was going on at the time and what the context is now. I filmed this video in January of 2015, and at that time the community had been established for 9 months as a humanitarian zone. You'll hear in the video from 2 women who were pivotal in helping to establish the humanitarian zone in the community. So we can show the video.
El malecón crea una estrategia también de meter el terror a estas comunidades. Y cómo meter el terror, desplazándolo, asesinando a esas personas que viven en terrenos ganados al mar.
No solamente una situación explosiva va a generar pobreza y miseria, sino que además en uno de los lugares más violentos.
Digamos, ya los grupos paramilitares están, pero ya están como más pasivos. Entonces, estos que surgieron ahora, que los nuevos, después de la desmovilización, entraron con más agresividad, que fueron ya en el 2012, ya asesinando a las personas frente a los niños de día, y los grandes, descuartizándolos, utilizando ahora nuevamente el nuevo método de asesinar como casas de pique, descuartizando a las personas, chupándolas y llevándolas para un lugar que realmente, o cementerio clandestino. Y ahí cambia nuestra dinámica de vida. Vamos jugando y cuando pum, asesinaron a uno ahí en medio de nosotros. Ya de ahí nosotros tenemos que dormir debajo de la cama a las 6 de la tarde, 5 de la tarde. En la forma de trabajo también cambia. Acá el 90% se crean de la pesca.
El tema de los pescadores que le roban todo lo que tenía que ver con motores, redes, le robaban todo el producto, todo lo que conseguían.
Llegaban sin nada, no había nada que comer para esa familia. A las vendedoras ambulantes, las que venden pescado, las que venden frutas.
Que tenían que pagar también diario una vacuna para que pudieran, digamos, para que pudieran trabajar. Un momento que incluso las vendedoras de gallina, porque había un solo distribuidor. Entonces, ¿qué hicieron? Como ese distribuidor tuvo un problema, no sé con quiénes, de ellos, que son paramilitares, hicieron que ninguna de las mujeres que le vendían a esa persona que siguieran vendiendo. Hubo un mes que esas mujeres no podían salir a vender porque si conseguían la gallina, ellos mismos se la quitaban.
Entonces era muy complejo, llegaban así por nada, sin darle de comer a los hijos. Interrumpía también las prácticas tradicionales de los niños. Los niños estaban jugando fútbol y si les llegaba a dar una pelota a ellos, le sacaban el arma de inmediato. Entonces los niños pararon también de jugar, pararon también de nadar en el mar, porque les daba miedo ir a nadar en la marea porque podían encontrar un brazo, una cabeza o unos pies porque ya habían conocido que ya habían asesinado y tirado al mar.
En el momento el mío era latente, que incluso yo en el momentico no sabía qué hacer porque una, no conocíamos el tema del espacio, de la zona. Dos, no había confiabilidad ni en la fuerza pública ni en los dirigentes que somos locales. Y tres, realmente estábamos solos. Uno, mirar que la gente de las 7 de la tarde tenía que estar en las casas. Uno, mirar que si uno hablaba era el blanco de ellos.
Me llamaban, me visitaban, muchas veces llegaron a mi casa, donde dieron plazo para entregar mi cabeza y, o sea, cosas como esas que yo me pregunté en qué momento llegan a mi casa, vienen por mí, no dormía, en la noche, en cualquier momento vienen, me sacan, me pagan, porque en esos momentos la policía no cumplía con su papel. Entonces ese era uno de mis grandes miedos. Mataban a las personas, las descuartizaban y si uno pudiera ayudar solamente escuchando los auxilios, los gritos y sin poder hacer nada, como miramos que nuestros hijos se iban construyendo hacia ese mismo camino, a ese abismo, que lo único que ellos veían era la madera, también hacían las semejanzas para entrar, hacían para entrar.
Antes el barrio era peligroso, porque entraron unos muchachos armados, empezaron a matar a gente, empezaron a hacer muchas cosas y a llevar niños. No había nada de casa vacía porque no había nada con arma. El otro día había una muchacha en una casa que cogieron a un amigo, mataron, le tiraron una bala.
¿Ustedes antes tenían miedo de esas cosas?
Yo sí, yo no podía salir de casa, no podía salir de la casa, todo el rato no podía estar por la noche,
ellos ponían la ley, ellos ponían las reglas, ellos sabían que había que hacer acá. E incluso, ellos empezaron a poner un reglamento acá. Si pelea, paga. Si tal cosa, si ellos decían apaguen esa música, tenían que apagar. Si ellos decían a los niños en un caso, tenían que irse. Todo eso tenía la gente un poco oprimida. Pero ya pues de tantas cosas, tanto que uno había vivido, tanto, digamos, temor y siempre hay momentos como uno dice, o morimos o vivimos. Pero ya esta vaina se tiene que acabar.
Empezar a sacar la cara por ella para que se motivaran las demás mujeres, para que dejáramos atrás pues el tema que es ser mujer o mamá es para estar en la casa, cuidar niños.
Ya estamos libres, ya podemos salir a la calle, ya podemos salir, podemos montar en moto. Estamos pasivos, somos ya libres y por ello fue que lo quiero sacar.
¿Qué hizo la comunidad para que cambiara algo?
Pues yo no tenía que haber empezado. Sí,
que caminaron, anduvieron a buscar los papeles, que vinieran a este espacio humanitario para que terminaran el silencio, y ya pueden más, ya pueden escuchar televisión, y antes.
Ahora por acompañar que se sepa, ustedes, pues, el malecón crea una estrategia también de...
So, humanitarian zones are civil enclaves of resistance, allowing communities that live in conflict zones to stay there and to continue to live their lives and to work, or if they've already been displaced, to return to those communities and be able to construct a space of peace in the middle of a conflict zone. These models have been responsible for huge strides in protecting rights in Colombia for communities. They work on strategies of political and physical accompaniment from national and international human rights groups. Most importantly, they work because the communities themselves are on the ground, risking their lives day to day and resisting the violence that's going on there and not being silenced and not stopping their organizing despite huge risks and severe threats to their lives and to their families' lives and to their communities' lives. The Inter-American Court on Human Rights also recognizes the humanitarian zones. This particular community, just to give you an idea of what it looked like to establish itself, they had lived with paramilitaries in the community for a very long time, but there was a period when they were under constant control of 20 different paramilitary people, and for months the rules and regulations that they spoke of were enforced in their communities. They got to a point where, they knew that their children were being terrorized, and if they didn't do something, this wasn't going to stop. And an extremely bold and very dangerous move One day they knocked down a chop-up house. The chop-up houses they mentioned in the film, Buenaventura has been talking about these chop-up houses for years, where people are dismembered. Recently, last year, they got a lot more notoriety because Human Rights Watch went in and did a report, and then it made national and international news. But the premise of these houses is to put them in areas that are very populated, concentrated areas where people can hear the screams and people are terrorized. And so, that's a tool for them to continue doing what the paramilitary groups want them to do. And so, the paramilitaries were watching them, were rotating, were always in the community, but one day when they left the community, this community had a chop-up house there, and the chop-up houses rotate, so they're not, nobody knows like how many they are, where exactly they are, because it could be there one day and gone the next day. A few people might be killed, and then it changes. And so there was a chop-up house in the middle of this community. One day that the paramilitaries were not there, they knocked it down. The community members knocked it down, which is an extremely dangerous act. And they also learned about humanitarian zones that had been established in the countryside. They went to the International or Inter-Ecclesiastical Commission of Justice and Peace Commission, which is a Colombian human rights organization that had helped to establish the very first humanitarian zones in the countryside. And they asked them for solidarity. They asked them to, or they petitioned them to help them establish one of those in their communities. And so this is the first time we've seen it implemented in an urban context. There are some differences, there are unique challenges and vulnerabilities, because unlike in the countryside where the entrance is a lot more controlled, there's so many ways into these communities, and they're not able to grow their own food. They don't have schools right inside their humanitarian zone. So when they leave the zones, there's a lot of risk to them still in the surrounding communities. This community lives blocks away from another paramilitary base that still continues to be active. And so these spaces have really allowed them to construct a different way of life, but leaders and community members continue to be under threat even when they live in these spaces. There's still tensions, there's still confrontations. It's a constant struggle for them, but through their actions, above all, their bravery and courage and coordinated support from national and international human rights groups that create political consequences for violence to happen in the communities, they've been able to make big strides in protecting their communities. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cassandra Atlas. I work for an international women's human rights organization called Madres. We work specifically with grassroots women's organizations on 3 continents, in Asia, Africa, and South America. And we do so through a 2-pronged model of working with community-based women's organizations to meet immediate needs of communities in crisis and also develop strategies for long-term social change. I actually wanted to just give a nod to Witness for Peace because I started working in Colombia because of being part of one of their delegations many years ago with Melissa. And I can really speak truth to the great work that they do there. So, I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about the Colombian organization that Madre works with. It's called Taller de Vida, which translates to Workshop for Life, and is an organization that was formed to provide psychosocial support, art therapy, and healing and empowerment to women and children who have been victims of the armed conflict, specifically in the context of forced recruitment into armed groups. As I said, through a variety of art therapy programs such as photography, drama, painting, and many others, Taller de Vida has worked with children who demobilized from the armed conflict to provide them with a sense of healing and empowerment, feelings of resilience, but also life skills to see that they can truly have a better future and recapture the childhood that was lost because of their recruitment into armed groups. And recently, one of the programs that Madre has undertaken with them has focused specifically on young women and girls who have experienced sexual violence because of their time in armed groups. This is an issue we together have chosen to take on because, frankly, it is an issue that has long been invisible in the context of Colombia's conflict. And, you know, we felt that it was absolutely essential to continue, along with other Colombian organizations, to raise the visibility of this issue and, you know, to make sure that, especially now that there is a peace process going on, that issues of gender-based violence are really brought to the fore so that they are, you know, addressed and redressed in the post-conflict context. You know, one of the things about this issue is that it's really a systematic issue. The IACHR has reported many times and framed sexual violence in Colombia's armed conflict as really a systematic tool of war. It is used, you know, physical violence, psychological, and sexual violence, all used as weapons to hurt the enemy, to dehumanize the victim, and to sow widespread fear within the community. And despite these kinds of analyses, you know, and the recognition that this is a widespread issue, reporting of sexual violence in Colombia's conflict is incredibly low. And there are outside organizations, international organizations, and local Colombian organizations who are doing the work of trying to really raise visibility around this issue and do accurate reporting. But just to give you an example, I don't really want to bog this down in numbers, but in 2011, Oxfam International released a report where they documented over 400,000 cases of reported sexual violence between the years 2001 and 2009. And in the same year, the Justice and Peace Unit of the Prosecutor's Office within the Colombian government reported that they had only documented 863 cases of sexual violence. So obviously there's a huge discrepancy in the numbers, and with that discrepancy there's also been a dearth of services to address this issue, and it's a really, really vital issue that prevents a lot of people from being able to move forward with their lives and actually to get out of being entrenched within the conflict. So that's where our programming started around this issue. It is a hugely impactful program, and the project is called The Girls of Water and Rice. I'm going to read to you why that's the name, only because I can't remember all of the details. But basically, it's Niñas de Agua y Arroz, and it's niñas, girls, because at a very young age, these children could not even imagine that they would be forced into the experiences that they were in. They were taken and they had to face being used and exploited sexually. Water, agua, because it is a metaphor for what they lived, facing political violence, violence in their bodies, having to move forward and continue surviving like drifting drops of water, but trying to penetrate the strong rock of pain and abuse, resisting having to face it, floating along despite each experience, to survive one more day without overflowing as a survivor. And arroz, rice, because it is an image of resilience, that a grain can be submerged in water, facing adversity, and isn't damaged, as it can resist without losing its essence and form. So I'd like to show you a video of the impact of this program that Taller de Vida and Madre made that worked specifically with a group, the first pilot group of teenage girls who had demobilized from the conflict and gone to Taller de Vida. And it's a photography exhibition as well as sort of a memoir of each of their experiences that accompanies the photography they created. And it's just a very powerful piece, so I'll let it speak for itself.
Sound? You need sound?
Yeah, sound would be great.
Speak for itself.
Gabriel, do you have the subtitled version?
I do. do I recognize this subtitle version? Who's gonna play it?
There should be two options on the DVD. There you go. Yeah. First one, I think.
a lot of pain, but women and girls and children are fighting, and I understand how.
Then, you know what, we invite you to join the conversation. Have questions, comments, want to share something. Yeah.
The State Department, U.S. State Department is aware of incentivizing killing, paying the Colombian military paying soldiers based on body counts. But I'm trying to recall, but I think that story kind of broke. It hit the press. But I'm wondering, has the U.S., because it broke and became, I guess, at least a minor scandal, has the U.S. put any pressure on the Colombian government, or is the U.S. policy towards or relationship towards the Colombian government been rather constant over recent years?
There was some talk during the talks with the free trade agreement, very briefly, that there was a need to address human rights violations, and some of that came. And some of it came in the heels of the crisis of the bureaucracy of victimhood more generally. There was the Supreme Court decided that the Colombian state's treatment of victims was unconstitutional. But it was not. It was political theater. It was not actual pressure. So it's not. I mean, to my understanding, I don't think that there has been any real effort by the American State Department to change American policies in regard to that.
Cassandra, you have something to comment?
I would just add a little more context about when that happened at the time. The current president of Colombia was the Minister of Defense. And so he was leading the defense policies at that time, and he's now the leader of the country. It's another level. And as far as the free trade agreement goes, yes, there was a brief moment, right, about talking more about the human rights situation in Colombia, and the Colombia Congress had long ago ratified the agreement, and it was held up in U.S. Congress for concern of human rights violations. So what happened was, after a lot of debate, there was something that was implemented that was supposed to address labor violations in Colombia, and that what we've seen as an organization, Witness for Peace, doing monitoring since the free trade agreement has passed. I was there before it passed and did a lot of organizing to stop it. It then passed, and the Labor Action Plan was what it was called. We continue to hear from labor leaders in the country that things have only gotten worse since the free trade agreement has passed. The labor violations continue. One of the big issues with labor violations was third-party contracting. So, basically distancing yourselves from responsibility for safety violations and human rights violations and things like that, because you're contracting out and outsourcing, and that was banned by the Labor Action Plan. That continues to happen on the ground. Practically speaking, its name has changed, and so we hear actually that labor violations and human rights violations around trade policies, around multinational corporation practices have intensified and increased since the passing of the free trade agreement.
I want to add something, and it's the fact that the pacification of Colombia, trying to have the military action through Plan Colombia, and the result has been a kind of pattern and model to show. If you hear, the permanent state even Justice Department talking that Colombia is a successful example. What is terrible if you hear all this. And we have cases, for example, Montoya is from the police. He's a high-rank police in Colombia. We know for the fact, through reports from Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and some other organization, that, and serious organization, you're not talking about someone who has no research, previous research to state that. And he was sent to Haiti to train police in Haiti. And we see what is happening in Haiti. You know, it's not only the UN police who is trying to stop all the demonstrations. We have the case of Mexico now. He was training people there. We have the case of the students. And they now want to export that to West Africa, where we have new interests. Then, you know, the fact is they believe there was a successful case. It's a lab. Colombia is a lab.
I think I have 3 questions for each one of you. So,
that's great.
And my comments tie a lot with what you just said. I'm from the Movement for Peace in Mexico.
Okay.
And so we see the same strategy. Except that our plan is named Plan Merida.
Yeah. Yeah.
So first, for Sebastian, I was wondering about how, with the pictures you showed, what kind of emotional help these mothers got, or how do they work their own resilience? And with the uncertainty you mentioned, until what extent do they trust in the international organizations and governments? And if you think that's sort of, I don't know if they trust. And in case they do have hope, do you think that's cruel optimism? That they still trust after 30 years, and maybe that's not the way? And if they don't, can you build on that? So that's for Sebastian. For Melissa, I found it very, very powerful that you mentioned the use of bodies and the use of sound and the use of the symbolic violence that all parties use. And you mentioned it briefly, and I find it, if you could expand more of how body plays into fear. And especially being of African descent. And the dilemma of humanitarian zones. You mentioned the NGO part and how there is some support from international NGOs, and you mentioned Human Rights Watch. And at the same time, it's a war fed by the US military, and international and American organizations work in these zones. So in a way, it's a war that fits itself with international aid in many ways. So what are your thoughts on that?
Texas.
And then for Natalia.
Cassandra.
Cassandra?
Natalia is my colleague. She couldn't
Okay,
be here today.
sorry. For Cassandra. How is the reconfiguration of identities from victims to agents of change? Because these women could be easily described as victims, but here we're seeing them as empowered women, and how that happens. Yeah, that's it.
Very good question.
Should I start?
Since you're the only male in the panel, you have the floor.
Ahora igual. Ahora me llamas.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So with regards to the therapy that goes with the pictures, so we had a process with each of the mothers in which we approached them prior to the photographs, and we explained the project. And there would be an interview that precedes the process of burying them. And it's and it was meant as an opportunity for them to think about what was about to happen to them, about the burial, and about what it meant for their relationship with their laws and their expectations of future reckoning. And then afterwards, there was a follow-up with outside professionals, things like that. And I followed up with them in a different kind of political sense. This project was also an opportunity to get the mothers organized as a foundation, which it hadn't happened before. So and this speaks a little bit to your second question about their hopes for international involvement or their trust in international organizations. Since this happened, the mothers have become kind of a symbol for failed policies in Colombia, or represent this break in which there was a lot of trust in the policies of Álvaro Uribe, the previous president, and then this kind of like opened the very dark side of everything that was happening, the price that we were all paying for this apparent pacification of the country. And because it became this symbol, they became called on by many people to do projects for them. Right? So a lot of they were being called to go give talks. Some of them traveled here to the United States and met with the president or the first lady, I think. Amnesty International sent them flowers every year, but then at the end, nothing happened. Right? There was no real justice was being brought for most of them. A lot of the bodies of their children could not be reclaimed because they became part of criminal processes, so they had to be kept elsewhere. They were still living in very impoverished conditions, and people were making real money from them, right? Because you have an organization that can say they're developing a program that treats this very public thing, but then they don't get anything from it. So this project let us get them all together and kind of workshop within the possibility of becoming an organized entity. And it was in part of a response to the distrust that these many years of being part of this industry that they had not navigated in a very agentive way, I guess. They had been used, but they had not taken full advantage of it. So it's part of this process that we're trying to help them and to let them guide what was happening there, or what is still happening. As to whether this is a cruel optimism, I mean, yeah, I think Berlin talks about like the expectation of the good life that comes, that allows you to maintain the cruel optimism, and I don't know that the sense of a good life is as prevalent in Colombia, especially amongst these people, as it is in the United States, right? So there's no feeling that any day now things are going to just turn out great. It's a very different relationship with the possibilities of your future, and I think that the sustaining loss of that all of these artistic projects let them do is a very different relationship with what an optimism might look like. That is not necessarily the American dream version of it, but it's a very restrained version of it, I think. That's it.
Yeah, thank you for that question. All those questions, just thinking about all the different ways that bodies and sounds have been used for violence and instilling terror in Colombia. The internal war going on in Colombia has been going on for over 5 decades now. And what we saw was the rise of guerrilla groups in response to a very unequal land distribution in Colombia. Guerrilla groups both from Marxist theory from the countryside, as well as university students, and so kind of these two different movements. And Witness for Peace doesn't support any armed actions and violent mobilizations of any groups, legal or illegal. But these guerrilla groups started to challenge that power structure in the country and really challenge elite interests in the country. And in the 80s, you saw the rise of paramilitary groups organized by large-scale cattle ranchers, organized by narco-trafficking groups, organized by different elite interests that were being attacked by these guerrilla groups. And actually the former president Alvaro Uribe Vélez was, a lot of people credit him with the founding of paramilitary groups, and a lot of people also credit the strategies and techniques implemented by paramilitary groups with the U.S. and the School of the Americas, and high-ranking generals that have been involved in atrocious human rights violations in Latin America that have been trained there. And so what you see in the 80s is the rise of these paramilitary groups to protect elite interest, and the rise of human rights violations, massacres on large scales, where some of these paramilitary groups some of the massacres and some of the groups associated with the massacres were nicknamed Chainsaw Massacre. They would cut people up with chainsaws. They would take their heads, deliver them on platters to loved ones. They would take their heads and use them as soccer balls. And this provoked international outrage. It provoked a lot of attention, and a lot of national and international human rights groups began to organize against what was going on. And so the strategies had to start changing and go more underground, and instead of doing large massacres in communities, do more selective killings at different times and different places, or just evoke the threat of a massacre. Or a community that's lived through these kinds of massacres, you don't have to inflict physical violence anymore. You can go there and you can use that psychological threat, and that's enough for them to leave everything behind. Colombia has the largest internal displacement crisis in the world. And what you see with bodies symbolizing violence in Colombia, rape against women has been used as a tool and a strategy of war. Children have been kidnapped. I once spoke to a family who his two sons were kidnapped because he was, the father was a community leader, and his sons were kidnapped and were held in a chop-up house, and saw what was going on in the house, and saw the people being brought there and tortured, and eventually he got his kids back. The story that's always stayed with me that really is something I'll never forget was when he got them back. I mean, he talked about the extreme psychological impacts that his kids had experienced from that, and how his older child really visibly was upset and would cry and would cling to him when he saw violence. And as much as that pained him, he knew that was an appropriate response to what had happened to him. But he was really concerned about his younger child, who at the sight of violence, who at the time when he was kidnapped was 4 years old, and now when things played on TV that were violent, he actually got glued to the TV and would laugh. and had a completely different response. And so you see that socialization of terror from a very young age, where they talk about in the community the ways that these kids emulate armed actors and, play paramilitaries and guerrillas and military and play with these guns and practice like chopping people up. And there was a mother who saw her son and his cousin playing together, and one had a father who was killed by the guerrillas, the other one had a father who was killed by the paramilitaries, and they were play fighting that they were going to kill each other. And the mom sat them down and tried to talk to them. It was like, what's if you really join these groups when you're older, what's going to happen if you cross paths? And they said, well, we're going to kill each other. So you see those cycles of violence and psychological socialization of violence start at a very young age, coupled with economic marginalization. So many people are forcibly recruited into armed groups or just don't have other economic alternatives, to the point of U.S. aid fueling this war. U.S. aid absolutely fuels the war in Colombia. In 1996, there was an operation called Operation Genesis in Urabá, and that military operation was backed by, the Colombian military going into a community with air forces, with on-the-ground support in conjunction with paramilitary groups. And this particular brigade, the 17th Brigade, was funded at the time directly by the U.S. military. At that time, they went into the community. The military told the community members, you need to leave, you need to go. There are paramilitary groups that are behind us. We're looking for guerrillas, and if you don't leave, we can't be responsible for what happens next. 6,000 people fled from the zone, and years later, when they came back to see what had become of their lands and their homes, what they found was large-scale oil, African oil palm plantations, cattle ranching, large-scale lumber projects. And so you see those connections and very direct connections with U.S. multinational corporations like Drummond Coal, corporations like Chiquita Banana, and Coca-Cola, to name a few. So we absolutely see military aid driving the war in Colombia, direct aid from the U.S. and Witness for Peace, along with many other groups in the country and in the world, calls for an end to that military aid going to Colombia.
Well, I think I should start by saying that the process of self-transformation, of moving from seeing oneself as a victim to an agent of change is not, it's not a quick process. Children and adolescents who come to Taller de Vida, they come there for a sustained period of time. In many cases, it can be up to 8 years that they've worked with the organization. And really, I think what Taller de Vida does is they really understand that it can't just be the art therapy, for instance, that is involved in this process of transformation. It has to be a combination of things. So that includes really tailored psychosocial and psychological support, where children have the opportunity. The organization itself is run by 2 sisters who are psychologists, and where children have the opportunity to have really tailored one-on-one therapy sessions, as well as group therapy sessions where there is a sharing of potentially very similar experiences. And they also couple that with human rights education. So it really works towards this sense of understanding that you have a set of rights, you haven't deserved what's happened to you, and you can grab onto these rights and you can do something about it. I think one of the things that really distinguishes the methodology of Taller de Vida and other grassroots groups, for instance, from the services that governments provide and that the government is providing, is that they're done in a way specifically to not re-traumatize people from the experiences that they've lived through, and to not re-victimize them, but instead to take them out of that victimization and change the narrative to survivor. And I think, beyond that, Taller de Vida has worked fairly successfully to also try to make this something more holistic and more sustainable by reaching out to local schools and making sure that a similar methodology is actually in the curriculum of schools, so that it's not just when these children are coming from school to Taller de Vida, they get 2 hours of this education a week, but that it's a regular part of their lives, and that it becomes, a real skill set that can be developed on a daily basis, to improve their perspectives of themselves and also the opportunities in front of them. And then I think on top of that, there are things that Madre and that Taller de Vida does to actually create spaces for that agency to be employed. So for instance, Taller de Vida worked with a larger coalition against child soldiers called Coalico in Colombia on the International Day of the Rights of the Child to actually take children who are involved in the program to be part of a demonstration to call for the perspectives of children of the armed conflict to be included in the peace process. So, I think it's a multi-layered process. It takes a long time, and it really needs to, encapsulate all of these different elements. But, it's pretty powerful. And the one other thing, actually, that they do a lot of the time is that a lot of the people and the children and adolescents who are funneled through Taller de Vida's program end up working for Taller de Vida. And they have a model of sort of intergenerational transmission going on where survivors of this kind of violence are then the educators of other people who have endured the same kind of violence. And that creates a very sustainable and cyclical way of making sure that this methodology is reaching the people it needs to. So.
We have a question from Colombia.
Yeah, someone saw our announcement of the event in Colombia and wanted to participate. This is a woman that doesn't believe in peace and on the peace because it's the state itself that persecutes and isolates the people from their own families. So she's asking that the state recognizes the victims of a U.S. Army. She's one of the mothers of 54 girls that were raped by the U.S. Army. She was only 12 when she was raped, and she was afraid for her future of her life, of her daughter. And she wants our support, and she says that it's impossible. She feels that it's not possible to get justice there. She has her hopes put here in the U.S. to do something. She wanted to come, then she realized it was not possible for her to come. It says that the Colombian state is putting makeup on immunity, giving impunity for impunity. So she wants you to talk about what something maybe how to Taller de Vida is doing something with those girls, or what can be done and what can we do from here, I guess. Yeah.
I think it could be interesting to, put these cases in context. You know a little bit about the situation, the probe that is now on with the military, U.S. military, who were there and how the situation happened, or before that.
I mean, that's a report that came out a couple months ago. Received very little attention from mainstream media about the rape of young girls by U.S. military officials and how the U.S. Hasn't done anything to bring those officials to justice, and it's been absolute impunity.
I one thing that we cannot forget is each time the U.S. military goes with like an agreement with the government where they go, saying that only U.S. justice can really, judge them. And even though it happens in Colombia, then the effort needs to be made here. Otherwise, these women, these girls will not have justice because it's the U.S. justice.
I would say that there should be encouragement for the U.S. to sign on to the ICC.
Yes.
And the Rome Statute.
The Rome Statute.
So that they can be held accountable in the same way of other countries for violations committed on foreign soil.
That's us here.
And as far as Taller de Vida's, whether or not they've done anything, I actually can't say with certainty whether they've been in contact with any of those young girls. Certainly it is something they're very concerned about, and I'm sure they would make their services available to any of those children.
We still have time.
I just wanted to say thank you. I think this is a really important panel, and I wish more people were here. And I guess I just have a question for everybody. Because it was interesting for me to learn about Witness for Peace and Madre. I'm just curious what other, more community-based organizations and other really big conflict zones around the world are you influenced by? So I'm thinking the Congo, or are there other, I don't know what your reach is, because I kind of came in halfway through, so I'm just curious what other organizations you're in touch with and what are their methods and stuff.
Well, we have a pretty wide reach at this point, actually. So we're in Colombia, we're in Nicaragua, Guatemala, Sudan, Kenya, Iraq, Syria, Nepal, which is very recent, Palestine, and several other places which are escaping me at the moment. But, I think for us, our methodology and our model has always been to partner with local organizations on the ground. And really our strategies for change are driven by, the expertise of local women and community members who really understand local conditions and who have lived through conflict and disaster and political repression and human rights violations. And so it's, a lot of it comes from really utilizing and welcoming the expertise of people who have lived, through context of human rights violations and developing programming that addresses those needs from the ground up. And so, I could tell you about each of the organizations we work with, but I think broadly speaking, it's to say that each of them is, an expert in what it is they've lived and really the driving force behind our work. So.
Witness for Peace was founded in Nicaragua over 30 years ago during the Contra War. And it was established when the Sandinistas had overthrown the Somoza dynasty, and the Somoza dynasty for a long time had been really working to oppress the people in the country. Wealth was highly concentrated in the country, and there were some people who were working in the countryside, and they started to hear rumors about the soldiers of the Somoza dynasty after the Somoza dynasty was overthrown, terrorizing communities. They also started to hear rumors that the U.S. was directly funding that. And so they started to research that more. They organized a large delegation to go to the communities and hear firsthand these testimonies. They confirmed that the U.S. was in fact directly funding these militaries that were terrorizing these communities. And so at that point, the model of political accompaniment, the model of solidarity, the model of bringing delegations to see firsthand impacts of U.S. policy on the ground began. And Witness for Peace started out as a one country, one issue organization, and that was its founding. What they found when they went to these communities, when they brought, the first delegation had over 200 people, and what they found was the bullets stopped, and when they left, they started again. And so the community said, please don't leave. And that's how Witness for Peace got its founding. It grew to work in Cuba, in Mexico. Right now we have a team, or the Nicaragua team is working on issues in Honduras. We've been in Colombia since 2000, since Plan Colombia passed, when human rights groups national Colombian human rights groups invited us to go to the country, really concerned about how increasing the force, increasing the size of the Colombian military, who at the time had one of the worst human rights violations records in the Americas, how really strengthening that military was going to impact the communities. And so they were very scared, and they asked us to come to the country. We've worked in Bolivia, we've worked in Venezuela, so we've been established in the Americas. We have a strong presence in the U.S. to also connect policies such as the drug war here and abroad, and really connect those struggles and raise awareness about its impact on specifically communities of color here and abroad, and work to really visualize the different ways that U.S. policy works both here and in the Americas. Very similar to Madre, Witness for Peace has deep partnerships with organizations that are on the ground, organizations that really know the issues, community leaders that are putting themselves on the line every day. Witness for Peace goes in and does a 10-day delegation. The international team does a trip before the delegation. We do solidarity work after the delegation is over, but we're there for a couple of weeks. Over years with communities. We have long-term commitments with communities, but we don't live in those communities. And so the people really leading the way for peace, the people that really know what's going on in the ground, the people that really know how things can change and what's the best way to change things, and really have a vision for something that's different, really understand that U.S. intervention has created a lot of issues in their country, and through self-determination that a different world is possible. Those community leaders are really, I think, best positioned to lead those struggles. And so Witness for Peace has deep partnerships with lots of different community organizations in Colombia. We work closely with the Inter-Ecclesiastical Justice and Peace Commission. That's a very well-respected national organization, national human rights organization. We work with other indigenous groups like Asine and Creek. We work with the processes of Black communities. We work with Afro-Des. We work with a lot of different small and large organizations within Colombia. We work internationally in solidarity in Colombia with organizations like Peace Brigade International, for the Fellowship of Reconciliation. There's a lot of different grassroots organizations that we work with. In the U.S., there's a campaign once a year, every April, and there are 20 different organizations, a lot of them in D.C., that kind of lead the way for this campaign, organizations like LAG, organizations like WALA, and Witness for Peace, and the partnerships that then connect with organizations all over the country, like the Movement for Peace in Colombia, that does a lot of important work, and other local organizations. We have, during that campaign, usually around 200 community groups and church groups and local organizations that participate in the campaign.
We want to hear a little bit more why you came here, you know, why you're interested in this session.
So I work in documentary film. I know you. I work for like a human rights documentary filmmaking company, and we did a film partially on Colombia, more on women's economic empowerment. And we did a grassroots screening tour of the film just to bring it back to the communities where it was shot, because a lot of documentaries in the U.S. are made, shot in Latin America, and then do the festival circuit here, and the people that are in them never see them. So we partnered with a Colombian itinerant cinema group and did a 2-month road trip, essentially, with a mobile screening setup across the country in February, March. So I was there for 2 months this winter. With a group of Colombian filmmakers traveling to rural communities and screening documentaries, and it was insane. It was a crash course in the political situation of the country. I spoke to many people, and I'm just like kind of deeply invested. I have many friends that are very invested in what's happening.
Yes, and I highly recommend the work of Skylight Productions.
Karen, tell us.
Well, I'm probably the one in the room who knows the least about Colombia. And I came because I'm from Syracuse, and in that general area there's a group of people, some of whom are my dear friends, who are in a sister community relationship with Cajibio.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of going back and forth. And whenever someone from there comes up, I go to the talks, but I don't really know that much about Colombia.
That's one of our partners. Please.
I am on vacation here. I was invited by my daughter.
Oh.
I live in Colombia, so I just want to know why you present our country to American people. So it's interesting for me. And there are something that we really didn't know, because the media is present not the real life that we are living in Colombia. So it's interesting to know the research that you do in Colombia about things that we never hear about that.
Thank you. Yes.
I've been involved in various anti-imperialist struggles, anti-war movement, and others. So obviously the U.S. has a big role to play. So as a person in the U.S., I feel more responsibility to learn more about the human rights abuses taking place in Colombia, and particularly interested in what people here can do to apply pressure on the U.S. government to make the situation better. But of course, it starts with learning what's actually happening on the ground. And as she just said, the mainstream media is not the most reliable source. So hearing from people like you is, very important and very informative. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
It's very important for me to be here because my family is from Colombia, and I think we have the opportunity to help create more spaces of dialogue so that people know what's happening on the ground in Colombia, so that we have access to that research and we can share it, and so more people become aware, because as one of the other attendees just mentioned, the media in Colombia does not share what really happens to many Colombians. who are living in the shadows very much like immigrants here in the U.S. And so to be internally displaced within your own country and not have a voice, I think for us it's an opportunity. We have that space and that responsibility to be able to do it.
Please.
I was in college back in the mid-1980s. I was in a study abroad program in Bogota, where for a month we lived with Christian-based communities that were promoting liberation theology. And so starting then, I was learning about Colombia from the same perspective that you've been sharing in terms of oppression, colonial oppression, and in particular the misuse of religion and Christianity against the oppressed. And then since then, I expanded from there to develop an interest in El Salvador and Nicaragua. And just I've simply followed it over the years.
I'm a Colombian activist living here, so just want to know more about it.
I just want to say thank you for being part of this panel. My name is Catherine, and I work for SOA Watch, School of the Americas Watch in Washington, D.C. And I'm part of a group that we just created called the Women's Council. And as a Colombiana, I have a very deep vested interest in Colombian human rights issues pertaining to women and children. I'm also part of CHRC, the Colombian Human Rights Committee in D.C. And that's how I got involved with the Movement for Peace in Colombia. So I wanted to say thank you and maybe start creating some partnerships and have you also be involved in the Women's Council. So thank you.
My name is Luis Cara. I also work at SOA Watch. Just to come hear presentations, and I think it's also just very important, like what was mentioned a little while ago about Colombia being used as a model, and how it, just how they're replicating the training in Colombia and other places, Latin America, especially right now, in Central America and Mexico. It's just, I also do legislative work. I think it's just also important to continue to push back against that, since even the Democrats consider it a success. And most obviously, that's just false reality.
My name is Amina Baraka. I'm a writer and poet. My husband and I, we visited Colombia through a writers conference, an art conference, and I found that the people there to be very nice, very kind, and I really wanted to go back. We were able to go back a second time, but we were there doing the United States propaganda about the drug and stuff in Colombia, and they didn't want us to go, but we went anyway, and it was lovely. People were very, very kind, and I'm interested in the Americas, because the United States is not. I know they say that the United States of America, but they think America is the United States. So I'm interested in all the Americas. I've been to Venezuela and Nicaragua. I first visited the other parts of America in Colombia, and so then we were invited to other countries, one in Nicaragua and the other one in Venezuela. And I'm just being born in the United States, there's a lot of Latin Americans, moving into the country. We have the immigration question. And my son is a mayor of Newark, New Jersey, and he's been fighting for immigration rights for all Latin Americans, because we know this country really does not belong to us. It belongs to the Americas, because we came here, we didn't come looking for work, we came shackled, covered with blankets of blood. We was actually trying to go back home, but they didn't let us. And so there's this big fight, and I just wanted to come to the workshop, see what you were talking about, and so that I may go back home and help him out with this question there, because, in Newark there's I don't know if you know anything about Newark. You do? Okay. You know about Melendez, right? And they're giving this award, the Gusano from Cuba. And so we have a big struggle here going on. And I just want to meet and understand the human question, because my position is that we're all human beings and all oppressed. Not all. There's like 1% that's really oppressing. But that's the only reason I came out of curiosity and wanted to extend my hand and let you know whose side I'm on yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Charlotte. I'm a union organizer, and a couple years ago I was teaching ESL and citizenship classes, and a number of my students were from Colombia, and we were doing a lot of immigrant rights work as well. And it was interesting just hearing a lot of the different stories about why folks, especially women, came here and what they were working towards. And I'm very interested in solidarity work, where I've worked with like CISPIS in El Salvador and other organizations, and I was especially curious to hear about the Witness for Peace and everything. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I'll just start with something that looked interesting. I don't really have a,
It's good enough, right?
Yeah. Please. Thank you.
I'm Julie. Yeah, I guess my interests are like overlap with everyone else's. I'm curious about like human rights around the world. I also teach ESL and have had students from all over the world, but from Colombia too. So I just wanted to understand more about the political situation, and I feel like all of us have a responsibility to do that because we live in a pretty powerful country, but also we're citizens of the world. So.
My name is Atenea, and I came because I find a lot of similarities with what happens in Mexico. So I have the feeling that through understanding better Colombia, I can understand better the place where I come from.
My name is Angelique. I work with community development at a civil rights nonprofit here in New York. I came for two reasons. One is, echoing what a lot of other people said, just wanting to know more about the issues that go around in the world. And this is one of the topics that you really don't have the opportunity often to learn more about and very organically. And then two, being from India, we're very heavily invested in a lot of the political social issues that go on there, and knowing how difficult it is to really relay that kind of awareness and information to outside of that area. I could definitely find parallels with some of the things that you guys are talking about, see it from a different perspective, but then also see all the similarities that underlie all of it.
My name is Tom. I've been following the situation in Colombia from a distance for a while. I was originally involved a lot in U.S. anti-intervention in Latin America since college, and I think this is a good panel to discuss what's been going on from a different point of view, to see what's really from the people's point of view, and see what's going there, and then try to take more steps stopping the funding from the United States to the military in Colombia. I think it's very good.
Hello, my name is Paula Angel. I am here mainly because I am a woman. I am from Colombia. And I am trying to help the movement of the peace here. I am trying to do something for my sisters, for the women in Colombia. So that's why I'm here.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming. We hope to stay in contact with you. And have again the opportunity to share with you what is happening in Colombia, and from here trying to change things to our, that our money, tax money, is not going for war, but for real development. And thank you so much. Thank you.